Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I don't know how to top DC Comics versus Marvel. Those are fighting words, and you know where you stand, whichever universe you're in. But it is wonderful to be here. Good afternoon to you all. Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends from around the world, a warm welcome to you all for this afternoon's discussion about the humanitarian and broader impacts of COVID-19, how the UN is responding, and ways that business and the UN can join hands in this effort. I hope you've all been enjoying this historic first virtual leaders summit for the Global Compact and participating in all of the powerful conversations that are being had today. You know, this is a unique time for business leadership in the world, in their communities, in their companies, as we all know. And it's a time of strategic opportunity to deepen the partnerships that businesses have with other sectors, working to advance human dignity, equity, and well-being at such a consequential time. So I'm just delighted to join you today to moderate a discussion with four absolutely extraordinary UN leaders to talk about COVID-19, humanitarian response, socioeconomic recovery, and insights that they have for business leaders from the UN. I'm Elizabeth Cousins. I'm President and CEO of the United Nations Foundation. The UN Foundation was created 21 years ago by Ted Turner at the invitation of then Secretary General Kofi Annan, for similar reasons, actually, and at about the same time as the creation of the Global Compact. Because Kofi and Ted believed, like so many of you joining us today, that the United Nations is indispensable to tackling humanity's greatest challenges and to driving global progress, and that the UN is strongest when it works in partnership with all sectors. And that's what our foundation was created to catalyze and support, along with others. Now, we all know how serious COVID-19 is, and you'll hear more of that from our panelists. Over 7 million cases, over 400,000 dead, estimates of a global contraction that could cost the economy trillions over the next 2 years alone, poverty rates threatening to increase again, acute food security, and it goes on. And we all still fear that we have yet to see the worst in humanitarian contexts in particular. Now, since the start of the COVID-19 crisis, we've also been seeing exceptional leadership and generosity from the business community, recognizing exactly how stark the challenges are. One of our own efforts has involved creating something called the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund as a way to channel some of that generosity to support the UN's frontline efforts to battle the virus. And over 140 companies globally have already given to the fund, along with approximately 400,000 individuals in countries around the world. You know, that makes them collectively the second largest donor to the World Health Organization's immediate efforts. And that's really something. So this conversation today is a chance for business leaders around the world to hear about the important work the UN is doing, often in partnership with you, to respond to COVID-19 and to look further at how the private sector can partner in those efforts. You know, we know this is both a marathon and a sprint. We need fast responses at the same time that we need sustained responses. We also know this isn't just about COVID-19, which intersects with and exploits in the cruelest possible way other disparities and inequities, whether that's racism, poverty, or other exclusions and vulnerabilities. So finally, just before introducing our esteemed panel to speak to these questions, let me just express a word of personal admiration and gratitude to Lise Kingo for her leadership of the UN Global Compact over these last 5 years, culminating in this summit today. Lise, you have made a truly vital contribution. You've left your mark. And as we look forward to working with your successor, Sanda, we will truly miss you as well. Well, I'd like now to introduce our esteemed panel of speakers. They are all absolutely remarkable and dedicated public servants who, luckily for us, now serve in the UN system. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director of UNICEF, Winnie Byanyima, Executive Director of UNAIDS, Achim Steiner, the Administrator of the UN Development Program, and David Beasley, Executive Director of the World Food Program. You know them well, you have their bios, so let's get straight to them. Now, I want to go to each of you in turn and ask you to take 2 to 3 minutes to explain to a CEO who may not know about the UN. Tell them about your work, tell them about what your organization is doing to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and why it matters to the business community. Henrietta, I'd like to start with you, if I might.
Yes, of course. So thank you, Elizabeth. And hello to everyone. And I also added my thanks to Lise Kingo. We really have benefited from your presence here at the United Nations. So UNICEF, we look after children. And children in our world are 0 to 18 years old. So let me just tick through a few areas that we are very deeply involved in. One is immunizations. So children should have routine immunizations, but right now many of them are missing out on them because they are not going to health centers. Their parents are worried about bringing them in, and so routine immunizations have really dropped off, 40 to 60%. This means things like measles, cholera, diphtheria, polio, those vaccinations that are routine have now been stopped. Mental health, big issue now. Children really are struggling with not being able to go to school. And many households, there is far too much violence. It is physical, it is sexual, and it is difficult for children. There's also lots of online predators. And so mental health has become very high on our agenda of something we need to be addressing as a system. There are lots of children that are in humanitarian crises, which you will hear from other members in the panel. It's difficult on children when they're trapped in a conflict that they're not a part of, but it's happening around them. They take it in and they become very worried about it. Our humanitarian system is very stretched. So anyone who can help us with supplies and funding and help, operational help, we can really use. So let me mention a few of those ideas. We have a big supply division and an operation that is about half of the vaccines in the world go through our doors. But we get supplies for gowns, masks, goggles, everything that is personal protective equipment. We need our supply chains to work. So could we use business? Yes, we can. We currently buy from about 10,000 businesses. We've reached out to another 1,000 new businesses in hopes that they can help us. We also get deeply involved with water and hygiene. So simple things like bars of soap are needed by us. And companies that do lots of work in water and sanitation fields can be enormously helpful. Therapeutic food. So severe acute malnutrition for children is one of the things that we look after. We do need food stuffs, and what's happening is that there's many stoppages on borders and within countries for humanitarian aid and for supplies. And I'm sure that David and others will talk about this, but just know that all of us are struggling with them. We also do cash transfers to families that are most in need. And we have been thinking about a couple of areas that we think coming out of COVID, we could come back stronger. So let me mention distance learning. Children are having a difficult time with schools being out of session. It is hard on a child. They don't see their friends. They don't have a regular routine. They're not learning. They're not sure they're going to be able to get back into school. And as a result, if they are one of the lucky children, which is half of the world, they have access digitally to school. And so some of them are able to download their lesson plans and continue learning, and others are able to learn just on their own on their cell phone. But for many others, half of the world, they are not connected online. So the largest, most important area that we think we could come out stronger after COVID is if we can get distance learning available for every school on this planet and every learner on this planet. And if we could, we think it will be the great equalizer. It is the chance for children in this generation to be able to be with their age mate in the developed world if they could catch up with them. So these are all areas of great interest to UNICEF and businesses out there. We can use all the help we can get. So back over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Henrietta. And it's interesting to hear how you're simultaneously at some of the sharpest edges of vulnerability in the immediate, but also thinking about the real strategic opportunities of long-term advancing of people's health and well-being. Thank you. Winnie, let me turn to you next.
Thank you. UNAIDS is not an entity, it's not an agency. It's a joint partnership of 12 UN agencies that came together to form a joint partnership to fight a global pandemic of HIV/AIDS. That was 25 years ago. This is a very successful joint partnership of the United Nations. We've led a response against a pandemic that has no vaccine, no cure, But today we have 37.9 million people who live with HIV/AIDS, and most of them, 24 million of them, are on treatment and are able to live a full life and not infect other people. But we still have 13.5 million people who are not yet on treatment, who are vulnerable to this second pandemic. So, what do we do as a partnership? I could say about three things. One, of course, we are very concerned that in countries of a high burden of HIV, you have colliding epidemics, HIV and COVID 19. COVID 19 is threatening the continuity of these HIV services that these millions of people live on. And it adds to the vulnerabilities of already HIV vulnerable populations. Some of them have comorbidities, so they're more vulnerable. So, what do? We are monitoring very closely the impact of the COVID pandemic on the continuity of HIV prevention and treatment services. We are monitoring the impact on production of ARVs, antiretroviral drugs, which sustain life, diagnostics, and other commodities. We are finding that in the supply chains, and that across the world, we are seeing disruption of production and distribution. And the barriers to the supply chain also are related to predicted economic shocks and also the demand for production for COVID commodities. So we are watching to see that production isn't diverted, but that there is production for both epidemics. Also, lockdown measures we are monitoring, we find that they are also coming in the way and presenting barriers to vulnerable groups to access the services that they were used to. That lockdown measures are being applied in ways that don't differentiate. So vulnerable groups that don't enjoy their human rights, are even more oppressed in situations of lockdown. So we're monitoring that. So one is to monitor the services, to encourage, find ways around disruptions, and to warn and to show what the disruptions could be. Recently, we modeled and we sent out an alert that if the disruptions were to continue for 6 months, that we could have an additional 500,000 deaths in Africa alone. So this monitoring, this alerting governments is very important. The second thing we are doing is on inequalities, tackling inequalities, because we know from the experience of fighting an epidemic that epidemics thrive on and exacerbate inequalities, whether these are economic inequalities, gender inequalities, racial, migrant status, disability. All these are compounded by an epidemic. And unless they are tackled, we can't win. So we've moved very fast to learn from our experience on the inequality of access to the science and to fight for equality of access. So we mobilized with civil society a call for a people's vaccine. 150 world leaders came together, including former presidents and current ones, scientists, to demand that if a vaccine is found, given that such public money is being put behind vaccine treatments and diagnostics, should we get it, we shouldn't have a grab like we are having now. There's a grab for PPEs, there's a grab for test kits, and we're seeing poor countries standing in the back of the queue as rich ones stock up for themselves. We can't have this when we get a vaccine. So we are pushing for commitments. We are working with the WHO, which has set up the only credible process for a fair production and distribution, and also rapid innovation by sharing knowledge and on vaccines and treatments. We are pushing that an arrangement is there in advance on sharing the technologies, the science, two, then sharing it regionally when it comes to manufacturing and agreeing on distribution so that everyone gets it for free. It can't be right that where you are living determines whether you will live. There's a moral, but there's also an efficiency argument, or shall I say a common sense argument. Why should you stock up a drug for, say, children in a rich country who will not need it and deny it vulnerable people in a poor country? So we're fighting on that, and we are insisting and continuing to mobilize pharma as well as governments. The third and last thing is, again, learning from our experience that what works is not a health approach, but a multi-sectoral approach that brings the whole of society and addresses all the other impacts together with the health impact. So we're working with communities and asking governments to bring communities at the center of shaping the responses, and that human rights are center in the responses. So these are some of the lessons learned that we are bringing in by working with governments, communities, and civil society. Sorry, I've been long. Back to you.
No, when you're speaking true, you can speak as long as you want. And I think the point that you started with about how a virus like this and epidemics accentuate and exploit inequalities is so powerful and important to take to heart. Akim, let me turn next to you in 2 to 3 minutes to say what is at the forefront of UNDP's effort on COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I join all my colleagues also in paying tribute to Lise Kingo, because this is a little bit a tribute to her also in that we are joining in this event here. But let me very briefly say the United Nations Development Programme, alongside the other members of the UN family, has a very particular focus on what development ultimately is all about. It's choices. Governments have to make choices. They have to address multiple challenges at the same time. And there are different phases in development also. So to some extent, it may be in parts of the world where we are still focused very much on poverty eradication, the challenge of inequality. How do you deal with social safety nets? How do you deal with crises where people suddenly have no income? 80% of people earning their livelihood in many developing countries still are employed in the informal sector. And COVID-19 has been a brutal reminder of what it means when that job ceases to exist. Namely, overnight you have no income, you have no social safety net. So that fundamental set of choices that governments, together with actors at local government level, in the private sector and civil society, have to shape how countries move forward, is at the focus of our work. But that can also translate very quickly into the kind of technology choices that we might make. For instance, if you are looking at the future of development, digitization and digitalization, the fourth industrial revolution, there are many terms that we use, impose on societies many significant new choices that they must make, investments, opportunities, and again, to ensure within that what the Sustainable Development Goals have made so clear. It's not a one-track opportunity. You can jump forward, you can grow your economy, but if you leave too many people behind, you are sooner or later going to get into trouble. So how can we make digitalization, for instance, in development, that extraordinary opportunity that we are seeing just now in the midst of COVID-19, countries literally setting up cash transfer schemes in their countries in 10 days or 14 days in order to reach millions of people and stabilize them in terms of at least a minimum income. These were developments that sometimes were 5 or 10 years into the future. But there are other choices also. For instance, climate change. UNDP is very heavily engaged at the moment with over 110 countries in its climate promise to help them address the choices they must make in terms of their national climate strategies. How do they move onto a low carbon path? But in parts of the world, that is not a matter of the choice of fuel or source of electricity. Actually, in Africa, 600 million citizens on the continent still don't have access to electricity. So how do you combine access to electricity with investment opportunities in renewables, on-grid, off-grid? And UNDP does a lot of work with governments in the field of governance, the broader governance of both the role of government, but also how do you de-risk the investment in an economy where maybe the private sector and investors traditionally would not necessarily look to. Countries are smaller, they are less developed, there are higher risks. So our role is to help developing countries both have greater autonomy and information and the ability to make choices, but also to invest in the role of government as an development enabler. The rule of law, anti-corruption, human rights, the support of elections, which we support every year with our colleagues in the UN system in probably 30 to 40 countries. These are the sorts of services we provide. And in the context of COVID-19, clearly what is also becoming very clear is that partnerships with the private sector are proving to be critical, whether it is, for instance, and many of us have worked in this in the last few weeks, the telecommunications companies helping governments to get information out to their citizens, the ability to trace and track, but also looking to the financial sector, the insurance sector. What role can they play right now in helping economies get back on their feet and hopefully build back better? So our presence in 170 countries, working with our sister agencies, often at the front lines of development, and in the context of this afternoon session, with each one of my colleagues also in some of the toughest, most challenged countries that are facing humanitarian crisis, war, conflict, natural disasters, and helping them through that humanitarian stabilization, saving lives phase to quickly get back on a development path. That is at the core of our mission. And so working with countries in having those opportunities, both through technical support, financial support, but above all, through also innovation. We set up in the last year 60 accelerator labs in our teams across the world because we've also recognized that many of the ideas for the future don't necessarily come from the outside. They grow from the inside, and we need to learn to discover them and make them more part of the development process. And that is, in a nutshell, how UNDP both works with governments, but also very much with the private sector. It's a fascinating era in which we are moving.
It is indeed. Thank you very much, Achim. David, let me turn next to you, last but not least, for this opening segment.
Well, this is a big one. You know, if anyone ever questioned the need for the United Nations, this is a time such as this that the United Nations is stepping up to help bring, hopefully, stability to the world in not just a medical or COVID pandemic, but also a hunger pandemic that literally is going to rip through the hearts of many nations around the world. So, Elizabeth, thank you. And it's good to see my friends up here, and Achim and Winnie and Henrietta. It's always great working with them. They're great partners, and it's such as a time like this that we come together to do what we can. Because out there, we before COVID hit the scene, I had already been saying that 2020 was going to be the worst humanitarian crisis year since World War II. And a lot of leaders were like, how can you say that? And I would go through it. Now, with Desert Locusts, compounded by COVID, and for the first couple of months, everyone was looking just at the health impact of COVID. And many of us were saying, wait, you've got to look at the economic deterioration as well, along with the supply chain disruption. Because quite frankly, I mean, we are now seeing, and I'm not talking about the hunger rate, I'm talking about people on the brink of starvation, 135 million people, now going up to 265 million people. We feed about 100 million people, and we're going to ramp that up. But 30 million of those, they only get their food from us. So if we lose funding because of economic deterioration, remittances, and supply chain disruption, we've seen 400,000 people die from COVID so far. We could see 300,000 people die per day for several months if we don't handle this right. And this is why it's all hands on deck by everybody. This will not be solved by the United Nations by itself. It's going to take everyone working together, and especially the private sector. So it's critical right now that we keep that supply chain going. It's critical right now that the private sector steps up, not just financially, but in terms of helping us keep the economy going, keep people on the payroll, keep the supply chain rolling, because if we can't get supplies and food and medicines out there, and Henrietta and WHO and all of us are working together like we're the logistics arm. We don't just do the food, but we also supply the big airplanes, the trucks, and the ships. And so we need $965 million just over the next 6 months because the commercial airline industry is all but shut down. And so we've got to move medical supplies. Just in the last few weeks, we've moved about 10,000 cubic meters of supplies. I'm talking about testing equipment, masks and ventilators and gowns and this and that. Over the next 6 weeks, we'll be carrying about 80,000 cubic meters for UNICEF and WHO, getting it to where they need it for the children and for the families and for the people. So we're the cargo industry right now. And for passengers, you've got to get the doctors, the healthcare professionals, the experts out into these countries that otherwise can't get there right now. So we're now the passenger industry. But we can't do this without the private sector. And Elizabeth, y'all have stepped up in a major way. And I think all of us can talk about this day in and day out. But let me give the bottom line. If we're not out there doing what we do best, you're going to have destabilization. You're going to have mass migration by necessity. You're going to have war and on top of war, conflict on top of conflict. And I can tell you, that's going to cost 1,000 times more by not doing it right on the front end. If we do it right on the front end, it's going to be a lot cheaper, and it's going to save a lot of lives and change a lot of lives. So that's why we're in this thing together, and we cannot let these people down. They need us, and they need us now. So I'll turn it back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, David. You've described parts of WFP's operation that probably a lot of people don't actually know about. So I'm glad that you did. And all of you have described the way that the UN system is just pulling together in an all hands kind of way in this moment of extraordinary global and comprehensive crisis. I wonder if I can turn back to each of you to just say a little bit more about some of the innovations that you've taken or that you've seen in working with the private sector in this immediate moment. I mean, you've all been at the forefront in different ways of driving that in your own agencies and with partners. Can you share just a brief lesson about or a story about an innovation that you've undertaken in this period, or where you see the most significant unmet needs or untapped opportunities in working with the private sector? I don't know who wants to go first, or I'll start calling on folks. Henrietta, do you want to take the floor?
Sure. Thank you, Elizabeth, because it's a great question. So let me start with supplies. So we can use supplies of all sorts. We have some companies who come to us because they're doing 3D printing for face shields. I mean, we're wide open, and assume that what I say is true for all of us as United Nations agencies. We are really interested in those innovations of supplies that you have. Second area is diagnostics. So we are looking for testing kits, and it's extremely important for COVID, but we can use testing kits for other diseases too. And diagnostics is a very important area for the future. We are also looking at it in terms of artificial intelligence. So what can we determine ahead of time that we're going to need? So how can we analyze the world that's coming? It's like how do you know where Ebola is moving? How do you know where Zika is moving? Where do you know that COVID is moving? All of those diagnostics, whether they are in the cloud or whether they are right in front of you on the ground, we need as a system. And then let me point out 3 areas that we've had help from companies. And Elizabeth, this ties in with the wonderful fund that you've created for COVID-19 that the UN Foundation started with the World Health Organization, and all of us are pitching in to help. So let me mention 3 companies, ING and Sony and Unilever. So ING has been a partner of ours for 15 years. And what they decided to do is they wanted to get the word out to their clients, to their customers, to their employees to say, we really need help. And so they managed to raise 4 million euro quickly. It's flexible. We can put it to use where we need it. All of us can use that kind of help from companies. They also are particularly interested in adolescent skill building because they believe that this next generation is going to have a chance, and they're their future employees. And so they're working with us in a couple of countries on employment accessibility. So with UNDP, we do lots of youth building programs, and it's a great area if any companies can help us mentoring and educating the young about how to be entrepreneurs and how to actually move their business and social innovation ideas forward. The second company is Sony. So very early on, they set a great example for Japanese companies. And they said, well, we too can mobilize our employees. And so they began to set the pace They did it so early that it caught the attention of the rest of the Japanese business community, and it set a model. So that's very helpful to us. And then the third one is Unilever, that has hygiene and many products that we use in hygiene situations around the world. And they've been a partner for a long time, and they're very interested in trying to help young people and to make sure that they get the skills in the future. So they decided they could help. But we have young people all over the world who want to help pitch in. We need to put them to work. We need to get them by your side as businesses, and they will become customers, and they will be employees, and they will be loyal for a long, long time. But we need these kind of partnerships. And then, Elizabeth, in closing, let me just mention one other in the learning side. So with Microsoft and with the University of Cambridge, we created something called the Learning Passport. And it was originally for children who were refugees and migrants, to what David was talking about earlier. There's so many people on the move. And so these children need to keep up on their schooling. And what this platform is, it allows you as a young person to get your national curriculum downloaded in your home language, and that you can keep up with your study. Now, wouldn't that be a gift for the world? It means that young people, wherever they are, could be learning, and they could be learning in their own language. We right now have it moving in about 13 front countries. So if anybody has products and services that they would like to move at this time period, we are all ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrietta. That is incredibly inspiring, and so many phenomenal examples of just real practical impact and at scale. Winnie, how about you? Any examples or a sense of where the untapped and unmet need is?
Yes, I will go back and say something more about the need for this people's vaccine, because there's a huge opportunity for innovation, and innovation that meets the needs of everyone. What is exciting here, and it's happening, but we need to keep an eye on it and push harder. Here's why. Most countries have actually committed that a COVID vaccine should be a global public good. They've used that language, and they've used language of fair, equitable for all. And this is good, and we're excited about it. And then also we see that they put down the money, a lot of money. The European Union with Gates Foundation, the ACT Accelerator Initiative raised about $8 billion. Gavi has just raised a lot of money. So putting money on the development of vaccine diagnostics and treatments, great. But, and then and even further, 34 countries at the World Health Assembly and global leaders supported what was called the WHO Solidarity Call, which includes an innovation, something called the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, CITA. That is a pool where there will be fast sharing of knowledge so that they are sharing the knowledge and we can move faster to reaching innovations that will save lives. So this is the one mechanism that can ensure true global solidarity in terms of that enhancement of fast research and development, and then fair distribution, manufacturing and distribution. However, and this is where I think we need to be honest, some of the talk doesn't match with the walk, because we are seeing some countries, governments making secret deals with their pharma companies to book huge doses of a possible vaccine. I could name two countries, I won't name them here, but they know who I mean, who have already booked out. And then the European Union recently made statements about something similar, but also with some hope for Africa. But it almost feels like Africa is going to get the crumbs after the rich countries have served themselves. This is not right. So we need to support what WHO is developing with our support, other agencies, guidelines for fair distribution, putting the emphasis on health workers first as a top priority and vulnerable groups first, and then getting the vaccine, if it breaks the ground, to follow these rules that will have been set. I, I, I think innovation often is linked to science, to scientific products, but this is real innovation where you innovate a process, a methodology for fair sharing of a technological innovation. And we need to support the UN to develop this and get governments to line up and use it. That is the innovation that's bringing science to the service of humanity that I want.
Thank you, Winnie. David, why don't I go next to you?
Yeah, Elizabeth, thanks. And this is just great stuff. And Henrietta talking about the artificial intelligence and all the things that we're doing together and innovation accelerators and blockchain technology and satellite imageries and taking advantage of all of this technology now. And that's been working with the private sector. You know, the United Nations, in my opinion, sort of shunned the private sector for a few years back, but you see a whole different mindset now, because I do believe that the leadership understands we're never going to solve these issues globally without the private sector being strategically engaged. And so how do we at the UN inspire and encourage and walk alongside the private sector in so many ways? And so when COVID hit, I think many people began to realize, wow, you know, this is a disease that transcends all borders, and we're in it together. And it literally is impacting the world, and I don't even think it's gotten started good yet. You can imagine if in a country, let's say like the United States, where you had supply chain issues like toilet paper and other things like that, in the most sophisticated supply chain country in the world, imagine what's happening in developing nations. And this got to be with us standing strong. And this is for Mars, Cargill, Takeda, and many, many other companies to help us move the supply chain along in these countries so that we can get the supplies out to people. Because it's not just a supply chain in terms of the humanitarian side, because we're literally only supporting 100 some odd million people. Well, there's another 7.56 billion people out there that depend on the supply chain to operate. So it's critical that the private sector be involved with us in meeting with leaders, talking with leaders to make certain that we keep the borders open, that we don't have export-import bans, that we don't have restrictions at ports and major distribution points, which is absolutely essential to feed 7.67 billion people around the earth. And so when COVID hit, let me just give you a couple of examples how we used the private sector in a most significant way, because the commercial airline industry was just all but shutting down. So we knew that we didn't have enough planes to do everything that we needed around the world. So we began meeting, for example, like with Ethiopian Airlines, and said, look, your planes are sitting about this deal. You can rate help. And it was amazing what began happening. So we would take a airplane loaded like a Dreamliner 787 from Liège with COVID supplies and flying it down to Addis Ababa. And then the private sector we worked with to fill that plane back up with things that they needed in the private sector in Europe. And so it cost us half as much to do it because the private sector engaged with us, and Ethiopian Airline opened up their supply chain and vendors to try to create a win-win so that we can do more for people for less. And that's just a good example of how many private sector companies are stepping up, knowing that they've got a lot of assets sitting on the ground, not doing anything. So how can we take those assets and reach out to people at a substantially less cost, but at the same time provide some jobs for your people who otherwise would be at home? And so this is going to be a critical time for the world. I hope we get through this, but I think the next few months are going to be extremely tough. But I have enough confidence and hope in the people that we'll get through it, and we're going to be better for it at the end.
Thank you, David, very much. Akam, your greatest hits of recent innovations, or where you see the biggest untapped.
Well, I think we have an orchestra here, and I think just listening to Winnie, Henrietta, and David, I think what you can sense is two things. One, the world of development is essentially a world of innovation. It is the constant search for better answers, better solutions, for new ideas. And, sometimes it takes the government to incubate the context within which the private sector can actually succeed. At other times, it's the private sector that leads with the technology, but it needs to be embedded in a social and economic context. So right now, just to add to the list, and it is really just an addition, it goes from the sort of way out there deployment of 5 robots, for instance, in Rwanda to support the national health system there with the COVID-19 pandemic. It sounds as if it is a strange thing to do, but actually it is the kind of experiment that in a few years' time will allow us to be less vulnerable to the kind of overwhelming of our health systems we're seeing right now. At the other end of the spectrum is the question of investment. How do we make it easier? How do we make it more straightforward for the private sector and for those with financial capital outside government and the public budgets to also invest in the achievement of public purpose of the Sustainable Development Goals? And we're experimenting right now with new SDG impact standards for bonds and equities, but also with investor mapping to try and show that very often the kind of things that are not happening are not insurmountable obstacles. They're just missed opportunities, and we need to bring people around the table together. And I think digital finance is another area in which we in UNDP have invested a lot in, first of all, learning what it is that could happen next, because nobody can really predict the extraordinary changes that are coming with digital finance. But what is already obvious is that if we do it right, and if we create the right framework, then instead of becoming an amplifier of inequalities, and Henrietta spoke to it just now, if you're not on the grid, if you're not on the internet, you are doubly punished in this COVID crisis. Now, can we do something to quickly bring hundreds of millions of people, school children in terms of attending schools, having their schools connected, but also literally billions of people into a digital finance economy where they are actually included for the first time, being able to transact, although they may not own property, they don't have a firm address, but they're able to operate in a financial system. They're not excluded any longer. Those are the innovations that we are looking for. They may be technology driven. Sometimes they're simply by changing a government policy. And I think the discussion about temporary basic income that is happening right now, or micro health insurance, the insurance industry could play an enormous role in the years ahead to address the hundreds of millions of people who currently simply do not have any health care. When somebody falls sick, their last savings are used to, get treatment for their father, their daughter, their mother, their parents, and fall back into poverty. We need to find ways in which we can bring, the capacity of an insurance sector with its risk assessment capabilities together with government and create economies in which health insurance becomes a part of the safety net that people can draw on. That's innovation at work. And I think, as David said, the UN has, 75 years of history now. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's way ahead of the curve. And I think right now in the midst of this pandemic, to echo David's words, I think the world will discover why it actually has a United Nations system and why it is not impervious to partnerships with the private sector, but also with citizens. We are very often the backbone of a world that, if it cannot use the United Nations, would not be able to act at this moment in time.
Thank you, Achim. And your point about development being a story of constant innovation, I think, is something for everybody to take to heart. And the UN itself has had over the years, it is also a story of innovation, which people don't always realize. We are perilously short on time with such remarkable speakers, and I don't know if we have any wiggle room at all to go a little bit over. But I wanted to ask if each of you could take 10, 20 seconds to just go around and leave one last thought or request or message that you'd like to leave with the business community today. What would it be? And Winnie, let me start with you.
Well, I would say to the business community that if we want to get out of this crisis, the coronavirus crisis, as quickly as possible, we need pharmaceutical companies in particular, research institutions, private and public, to pool their knowledge, their data, their know-how, intellectual property, so that we can concentrate on finding the solutions as fast as possible, manufacturing at scale. We need products for the whole world. There's no company with a monopoly that can serve the whole world's demand and distribution, so that we do this at an unprecedented scale. This will be the innovation of our lifetime if we can do that. We did it for HIV, but first it took a decade. Millions of poor people in poor countries died as the people campaigned and asked for solutions that are now there. Different prices for different countries of different incomes, leading to the treatment being there for all people free of charge. But it came late. We can't afford that now. Pharmaceutical companies are at the heart of this and should come on board.
The appeal for the innovation of our lifetimes. I like that. Akim, let me go next to you. And if I can appeal to you, just 10 seconds, 10, 20 seconds.
10 seconds. Inequality matters. It matters to business. It matters to each one of us. It matters to the role that governments play in the social contract on our behalf. I would wish that business embraces that responsibility. There is more to business than just shareholders. It's public purpose. We need governments and the private sector, and within that, citizens to form partnerships. It's the way forward. It's the way out of COVID-19. And it's also a way out of what was already going wrong before COVID-19. Thank you.
Akim, thank you so much. Henrietta, final thoughts.
Thank you. So I think we can emerge from COVID stronger than before. One of the things that we're now doing in the United Nations is these public-private partnerships. We struggled with how long it took to get the partnerships up and running. But right now, in the humanitarian side, we're running 20-day turnarounds from the time we get money to the time it goes out to the field. So try us. If you haven't worked with the UN, but you've been wanting to, come approach one of us. We'll get you connected with everyone else, and come change the world with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrietta. David, final thoughts from you.
Final thoughts. This is not a time to be bashful and shy. This is a time to engage. If you don't get out there, we'll work with you now. And we need you literally today, not tomorrow.
Fantastic. Well, you are all an extraordinary panel. You are leaders and problem solvers of the highest and most impressive order, and it has been such a privilege to spend this time with you. You are like an amazing mashup of the Justice League and the Avengers all at once, you and your team. So thank you for everything you do. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you to everybody who has joined this remarkable session, and to the Global Compact for convening us. We're over time. There is so much to say. I would love to spend much more time with all of you, but thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Hello, delegates. Welcome to the SDG Power Hour. In this next hour, we'll be talking about UN partnerships and a couple of rules here. A couple of rules for this is that we're going to printables, UN agencies. They are bringing with them a collaborative partner. We want to know why and where they stand with COVID-19, how their work, their collaboration is changing. And we are going to do it fast. It is not going to be boring. It is going to be exciting. We're going to add your comments as well. The idea about the SDG Power Hour is the SDG zone. If you've ever been to UNGA, you would see that tent and the seats just outside of the main entrance to the United Nations. And in there, all kinds of funky, cool things happen. The conversations are short, they're brief, they're peppy, they're provocative. Inside, there are longer conversations. They go on for some time. Outside, they're brief and to the point and impactful. That is the idea of the SDG Power Hour. I know that you are online already. I know you're on social, but if you're on the conference platform, jump into the chat there. I am going to be looking for your conversations, looking for your comments, looking for your questions. Each little bite lasts between 15 and 10 minutes, so don't be thinking about it. Go ahead and comment, and I will try and get your comments into the conversation. Let's start with the UNFPA. The SDG Power Zone starts now. I love this. I love this section because I am going to have a cup of tea and I am going to hand over to the Executive Director of UNFPA. Hello, Dr. Khanum. Nice to see you. Who did you bring with you and why?
Hello, Femi, and thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to vote for my favorite SDGs, number 3 on health and number 5 on gender equality. And the message that I'm bringing today is that COVID-19 has pulled back the curtain on inequalities that were already there, but now they're thrown into sharp relief. And I say this because for women, the sacredness of the reproductive cycle of life means that contraception, menstrual products, everything that concerns women, up to and including personal protective equipment, PPEs, has been challenged during this pandemic. When you have a lockdown for a 6-month period, UNFPA and our partners have just studied what's that impact. And we find that for every 6 months, we will have no less than 47 women additionally globally who are going to miss out on their contraception of their choice. And very sadly, that might lead to 7 million unintended pregnancies. But what breaks my heart is the pandemic within a pandemic. And by that, I mean the violence against women. You can imagine being trapped in an abusive home or location during a time of curfew. And for every 6-month period now, to have an additional 31 million cases of gender-based violence is too much for me to bear. And that's why I've brought one of my biggest partners, Michael, with me.
Oh yeah, great to be here on behalf of Global Citizen. Thanks for inviting us to the conversation.
Well, yeah, Michael, I was hoping that you would say a word about what this proposition of resilience and involving other stakeholders than our usual partners. Look, I'm a public health physician, I'm an epidemiologist, but for me to attract young people and to make sure that what we're doing is transforming that paradigm of the Sustainable Development Goals, it's not really just a medical problem. So I thought that you might enlighten us on how Global Citizen mobilizes for social change in the era of action on the SDGs.
Yeah, thanks, Natalia. And I think we're both here in Brooklyn in different ways. So it's good for us to come together on this call. The Nairobi summit seems like a lifetime ago now. But look, Global Citizen, you know, for those of you that don't know us, we're a movement of millions of activists around the world campaigning for the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we often call our approach pop meets policy. We say that we need to, you know, mainstream these issues, galvanize people around it, and then give ordinary citizens a platform to take action, to demand their leaders, you know, put this on the agenda, put the rights of women and girls everywhere on the agenda, and make this a top priority. And so, you know, we work with some of the world's leading artists. We're most well known for our Global Citizen festivals as well. But I'm proud that over the last few years, we've been able to stand shoulder to shoulder with UNFPA. You know, we've got issues with our aircon today. Otherwise, I would be wearing my UNFPA tie, Natalia, that you've given me several now after I spilled Coke on the first one. But look, you know, we've been proud to stand together, whether it's for our She is Equal campaign, whether it was last year in the lead up to Nairobi. And we certainly echo that we need to support women and girls. And what I hope is, you know, through citizens using their voice, calling on companies, you know, for many out there who are consumer brands, many of our citizens would be consumers of yours. And I think it's working in partnership to deliver for women and girls everywhere. And Natalia, I guess on the subject of how companies can help, you know, we were just talking about the fact that the rights of reproductive health needs don't disappear even in the midst of the pandemic. You've spoken about the need to ensure access to sanitary products as well, because menstrual health is important. And so, you know, I certainly believe, and I've seen it, that the private sector can play a transformative role in development and justice. So I was hoping you might be able to share a little bit about how many of the companies listening can contribute to your work.
Well, thanks. And I'll just say a couple of words about that. One is that the private sector is renowned for innovative thinking, and the power of imagination is part of the reason why our private sector partnerships have worked so well. Of course, UNFPA has a giving program, and we need donations because that's what we use to provide that midwife with her personal protective equipment at the bedside of a rural area somewhere in the 150 locations where we're working in the developing world. But we also really treasure this whole idea of innovation because it sparks the interest of an oncoming generation. And I'll just use one example of our new partnership with Prezi, which is helping UNFPA to share critical information across a youth platform which this being a communication software company, hundreds of young people from all over the world in their own languages have given correct information about COVID. They've talked about what's on their mind. And this is kind of like a short clip that's in their hands to produce. I think what we really want to say is that whether this woman is a daughter, a mother, an employee, a sister, the point of wanting the private sector to help us develop new ways to ensure gender equality, to ensure that we prioritize what it is that women and girls need, that's really part of the successful equation in the partnership that we're showcasing. And we love working with Global Citizen for that reason. So over to you, Femi.
One of the things I wanted to check with you, Natalia, and also Michael, is how are you changing the work that you collaborate, the way that you collaborate, because of COVID-19? Have you thought, okay, we need to do this differently? Have you worked together faster now because everything happens so quickly?
Well, actually, maybe, Michael, I'll invite you to say a few words about what we did in Brussels just before the lockdown began. We had such an exciting evening of Global Citizen featuring EU Spotlight. So, Michael, I'll turn to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Natalia. Look, I think it's been a challenge, and we've been working together. And again, it seems ages ago since we were in Brussels, and I was aware that before we all went into lockdown, we were planning this year to mark the 5th anniversary of the goals with a series of 8 concerts taking place on the same day. And, we saw, supporting the fundraising needs for UNFPA as a key part of that. Now, of course, when that all went into lockdown, all of those concerts, people couldn't gather. And so, we got a call from Dr. Tedros of the World Health Organization, who I know stands shoulder to shoulder with Natalia, and said, well, could you do something virtually that talks about the need for people to come together? Because there's so many marginalized communities, include not least women and girls, who are going to need a way to get that support. And so very quickly, we threw it over to the likes of Chris Martin, John Legend, Shawn Mendes, and Camila Cabello, who had the idea of sharing on their phones, streaming from Instagram, virtual concerts from their lounge room. Little did we know that would get the attention of Lady Gaga, who pitched, could we do a big event together, one world together at home? And it truly was the world coming together at home for that one day. And I know, Natalia, we had your great support and others on that, which was tremendous. And, I think, we received support from around the world. And I guess from us, off the back of that, we received a call from, jump in.
So, Michael, are you saying that the Together at Home, that was your idea? That's how it started?
I'm not saying it was mine personally.
Because look at my face, Michael. That was massive.
It takes a village. And I would say...
I thought it was Lady Gaga, but no, it was Michael.
No. There were multiple people. I would credit Aminah Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, for calling us out and calling us to service, and we felt compelled. I would say, Chris Martin, because he did it initially from his room and threw the baton to John Legend, and then it picked up. And then I would just say Lady Gaga. She had so much care for the message. And making sure that...
But before there was Lady Gaga, there was Michael. Michael, take a bow. That was phenomenal. OMG. No wonder Natalia brought you as a partner.
What I loved about it is...
You're making me blush now.
What I loved about it is you translate an idea, which is a sustainable development goal on health, and you also make it clear that life doesn't stop during a pandemic. So the creativity of working with people like Michael and Global Citizen and their reach to bring new partners to the table, that's what makes this such a great example, because UNFPA is doing our work day by day humanitarian refugees. We work so closely with UNICEF, and you'll hear from Liu from DESA. The things we do are not abstract. They're helping that girl in the village to eventually get back to school so that she can be a productive citizen. So absolutely, I think Amina Mohammed, our Deputy Secretary General, was one of the sparks. But if you don't have a partner, you can't do it by yourself. So that's what we hope to represent in our little tag team here today.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that was a revelation, I have to say. I am going to withdraw all those tweets that I sent to Lady Gaga and then resend them to Michael and to the UNFPA. That was amazing initiative. That just goes to show what you can do so quickly and with that energy and the ideas that maybe we can't meet in person, but there's something else that we can do. I am just wondering here how you translate your focus, your mission, your drive from where we are with COVID-19, where we're in lockdown, we're semi-lockdown, we're coming out of this economic collapse that we've had globally, and still stay on track for 2030. Michael, how's that possible? How do we do that?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we did Together at Home, that was very much about, meeting immediate needs, supporting frontline health workers. Now we're coming to grips with the secondary effects, including not least on women and girls. But you're seeing it, across the areas. I saw, you had David Beasley from WFP on before this, that he can tell you what this means famine-wise. So what we're doing is, in a week and a half on Saturday, June 27th, we're thrilled to be partnering with a number of UN agencies, including the UNFPA, to really shed the spotlight on the impact this is having on marginalized communities everywhere, not just in poorer countries, but also in developed countries, right across the board, you're seeing this impact. And we invite all of those companies listening to join us to make contributions. We've got some exciting announcements on Thursday, following up from Together at Home on what that might look like. We've got all the broadcasters coming together that help put on One World Together at Home. But for us, it really is about putting the spotlight, because if we can't address the issues, look, before this, we were saying that it was going to cost $350 billion a year additionally in order to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Now, because we haven't just lost a year, but in a country like Nigeria, 10 million people are living in poverty as a result of COVID-19. So the financial need is going to go up. And I would hope that those who are most well off in our society, who have seen the impact of this pandemic, would consider contributing to make up the shortfall, because we know public financing is strapped. And I think we need innovative partnerships. And can I say, it wasn't something she spoke publicly about, but one of the biggest things Lady Gaga did in the lead up to Together at Home is she used her convening power. She got 70 CEOs together on a call, and she asked each of them if they would contribute to this effort. And that was really what led to 128 million being pledged. And that's what we need more of. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Natalia and Michael, you embody our theme for the Leaders Summit, which is recover better, recover stronger, recover together. Thank you for bringing your collaborative powers to us here on the Leaders Summit and in the SDG Power Hour. Very, very powerful start. I appreciate that. Thank you both. Goodbye.
Thank you too, Femi. Thanks for everything you're doing. And we look forward to more partnerships. Thank you.
Take care. All right. Well, that was an excellent start. All right. So here we go. This is what we're doing on the SDG Power Hour. We are bringing UN principals, head of agencies, and their partner. Who are they partnering up with? This hour is looking at UN partnerships. So we're going to bring together UNDESA and the Bank of America. Hello. Welcome, Under Secretary General. Tell me who you brought with you. Who is your partner?
Hello.
Hello,
Femi,
nice to see you, UN Secretary General of UNDESA. Under Secretary General, I should say. I just promoted you. I'm so sorry, Lou. I just promoted you. Tell everybody, first of all, who you are, who may not be familiar with you. Maybe the one or two people who don't know your work. Introduce yourself, first of all.
Thank you very much. I think I'm honored to be here to join you. and join with other colleagues. Especially, I'm so honored to join our partner with Annie Kane, Vice Chairman of the Bank of America. I thank Bank of America for joining GISD. That's Alliance for the World Big Financial Institutions Secretary General created last year. That's why I think this is start of the United Nations to build up a public and a private partnership for financing for development. This is a requirement not only from the Addis Ababa Agenda for Financing for Development, but also very detrimental to the implementation of 2030 Agenda. That's why I think when we are confronting this unprecedented COVID-19 crisis, it's important for us to talk about how we are going to build up our partnership between the United Nations and the private sector in supporting member states, supporting our world citizens for the better recovery and recover back better. Of course, first and foremost, we need to really contain current health crisis. Then we move to prepare for the recover better. Thank you, Femi.
So I'm curious about the partner that you brought with you. One of the most powerful women in banking. Hello, Anne. Great to have you. Tell the world who you are.
And thank you, Mr. Undersecretary. So my name is Anne Finucane. I am the Vice Chairman at Bank of America, and among my duties, I oversee our ESG efforts at the company, and along with our Chief Operating Officer, I co-chair our Sustainable Markets Initiative, which means we figure out how we can apply the principles that we know from financial services and banking on ways to underwrite a roadmap on the Sustainable Development Goals, how to finance different efforts.
So, and how did this partnership happen? Did you go looking for it, or did the UN DESA come looking for you? How does that work?
Well, perhaps I'll let the Undersecretary speak to that first, and then I'll.
Yeah. So, Carly, I think I arrived in DESA in 2017. So when we prepare for 2018 Financing for Development Forum, the annual forum, we convened just half an hour investment fair, called SDG investment fair, with less than 100 people. That lasted for 2 hours. Just a kind of idea that be to elaborate how we could really mobilize private sector support for the investment SDGs. Then last year, we convened a full 3 days event on the investment fair for SDGs with the participation of over 400 private sector participants. That reminded us, I think, to be really implementing 2030 agenda not the business for governments alone, for international bodies, but we need to mobilize private sector support. Then we see to be, instead of we were convening the investment fair for the private sector for investment SDGs annually, we need to create a partnership. So that's working with SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, to see what kind of agency partnership we could create. And we started to talk with 30 banking institutions, finance institutions, including Bank of America, to say whether it would be possible to have set up such a partnership. Then it decided with full support and of these 30 CEOs of 30 agencies, financial institutions, Secretary General launched this GISD alliance last October. Of course, I think Secretary General Committee meeting and met with these CEOs. I think so. In responding to the current COVID-19 crisis and the mobilized support from the private sector, Secretary General convened an extraordinary meeting last week on June 10th with all the CEOs of this alliance. I appreciate the support of this alliance. I think now that this partnership now in place. But of course, it's an issue remaining for us how we are going to enhancing our partnership.
Anne, you pick up. Did Lou leave you any more of the story to tell? Go ahead.
I think so. Thank you, Lou. I would say this in that meeting that the Secretary General held a week or so ago. The large issue is obviously the need for debt forgiveness, the need for innovation, while also following a focus on the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course the issues around healthcare, which are disproportionately hurting emerging markets and in the U.S. People of color. So once again, this requires financing. It requires putting money behind it, and the idea is to take the innovation and energy that we can put against a marketplace and create some opportunities in the against the SDGs. And it's quite possible, actually. By way of credentials, we're the largest underwriter of green bonds in the world. We have been able to apply, as I said, market-based philosophy and practices against some opportunities, whether it is helping to underwrite water. We worked with water.org to create a water equity fund, raising over $50 million. We've been able to underwrite, as I said, a large green bond facility over the years, more than $50 million of underwriting. And once we learn that, we and other financial institutions can combine together. So if I were going to say if there's any learning we've really had, it's that financial institutions can do two things. One, we can partner together along with private equity, NGOs, nonprofits, and governments to each take different sets of risk against an effort to stand up, whether it's a wind farm in the North Sea or it's a hospital in Nigeria. Just all of us coming in together and taking a different level of risk. And then applying, as I said, some innovation in products and services that we may know from the marketplace we're accustomed to, but that is underwriting green bonds, creating tax equity, these kinds of vehicles and products that probably would bore you, except for if it can raise money and go to the greater good, you're going to be interested. And we can talk in billions and tens of billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, not just dollars and cents. So as a result, we've been able to apply some of this in the work that we've done recently, including having just issued a $1 billion COVID-19 social bond, which is intended to help secure financing for nonprofit hospitals and for treatment, testing and treatment in markets all over the world.
And if I may, if I just want to jump in here, I am curious as to the status of the banking industry right now. Now that we have an economic downturn for obvious reasons, will banks be less inclined to actually fund the SDGs, to invest in development, sustainable development, green development? How do we get rid of that risk adverseness and say that let's be bold? Are you seeing that boldness?
I am seeing this boldness, and I'm seeing it well beyond my own institution. First of all, there was a statement made a couple of years ago by the Business Roundtable out of the U.S., and before that by the WEF, that essentially embraces the SDGs, and it's talking about thinking beyond shareholders and thinking about your employees and your customers and the communities in which you live, both locally and as a global citizen. And you cannot maintain a strong employee base, you cannot maintain good customer service, and you cannot maintain a reputation as a corporation in this world if you are not willing to demonstrate your value beyond what you're doing for shareholders. And that's not going to change, and I think it's accelerated with the global recession. And as I said earlier, we're applying what we know to the future. So despite the fact that the U.S. may not have or may have pedaled back on COP21 in December of 15 in Paris, nonetheless, corporations made commitments. And once a corporation makes a commitment, they're well down the road. And as I tried to sort of give you a sense, we also have figured out how to make a marketplace here, which makes it even more appealing. So no, we're not going to turn back. We've been able to apply innovation and help here. And it's important to maintain your reputation, to be sure that you've made a contract that you're sticking with, and to accelerate that. So I'd say we're accelerating, not stepping away.
Mm. I have a comment here, which is a good way to wrap up our conversation between the Bank of America and UNDESA. And this comment comes from Irene Sim. Irene is watching. She's one of the delegates in this virtual conference. She says there is great opportunity for public-private partnerships, especially financing for sustainable development. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Lou, for bringing your partnership to the fore and sharing it with us in the SDG Power Hour. Appreciate you both. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabi.
You're so welcome. I want to bring up something that if you're following the news, if you're following development, you may well have seen this. But when lockdown started to happen around the world, there was an uptick in domestic violence against women, against children. And that domestic violence, that uptick happened all over the world. You may remember the executive director of UNFPA, she called it a pandemic within a pandemic. At the UN agency, UN Women, they call this the shadow pandemic.
Right now, many people are trapped in their homes with an abuser. This is the shadow pandemic. In one weekend, calls to domestic abuse helplines in the UK went up by 65%. In the US, Asia, and pretty much everywhere, reported numbers are rising. These aren't just numbers, they're people you might know. If you think someone is in trouble, check in on them. Ask them if they're okay and if everything at home is okay. Educate yourself about domestic violence. Know the details of local services like helpline numbers or shelters. If she tells you or you suspect that her life or the lives of her children are in immediate danger, call the protection units or the police. The shadow pandemic is spreading right now. Let's help each other safely right now.
So here to talk about their partnership against gender-based violence, the CMO of Google and Executive Director of UN Women. I will get you to introduce yourselves. Edie, you go first.
Well, I am Phumzile Lamboncuka, and I'm the Executive Director of UN Women.
It's good to have you.
And
Good to
I'm
see
Lorraine.
you. And Lorraine, go ahead.
Sorry, Femi. Hi, Femi. Hi, Phumzile. It's wonderful to see you both. I'm Lorraine Tuchel. I'm Google's Chief Marketing Officer.
Phumzile, why did you bring Lorraine as your partner? Why was Lorraine the person?
You know, we have a very strong partnership with Google, which Lorraine will also elaborate on. We need to make the impact of this pandemic on women more visible. Gender-based violence is one such crisis that women are facing. The loss of income for women who don't have savings, who also tend not to have enforceable contracts. So even with fiscal stimulus from governments, women cannot maneuver very well at this time. And of course, women are also facing the burden of care, because when hospitals are full and sick people need to be kept at home, it's women and girls who must do the work. So they actually substitute for the healthcare system. And Google is our partner, and what I would like to highlight between us at this time is how they are trying to make these issues visible with the support they've given us for marketing the message that we're sending for to policymakers. And I think Lorraine can even explain this partnership much better than I can, sorry.
Happy to speak a little bit more about it, Femi, if you want. It's been such a joy to work with Phumzile and her team over many years, and it was just during this awful pandemic that Phumzile reached out and made me aware of this concept of the shadow pandemic, which was something I hadn't heard of until Phumzile really reached out. From our point of view at Google, of course, once the pandemic hit, we were very focused on providing trustworthy, authoritative information to everybody about COVID-19. We worked very closely with people like the CDC and WHO to have that information be actually on our homepage and in our search results and across YouTube around the world. We also worked really hard to get young people to pay attention by launching a big program called Stay Home, Save Lives across YouTube and Google to get young folks to stay home and listen. And so we had a lot of stuff going on to really make sure we helped. And one of the things we did was to build a central hub, a website with authoritative COVID information, which was hugely important for us to make sure we had that out there and available in over 100 countries. And so that's where we could start to weave in all of the great work that young women are doing into our website and being able to work with subject matter experts. Like for us, that's the critical thing, which is what Phumzile's team really brings to the table, so that we can surface reliable information for survivors of violence. So we noticed that, for example, many NGOs started reaching out to us, anti-violence NGOs, and asking us to use our platforms to surface information for women and girls at risk of domestic violence. And so we've also worked with over 27 NGOs just to help them make it easier to find their information. An example would be, for example, Google Maps. You can't be found if no one knows where you are in a digital world. So what changes when we all move to a digital world through COVID? And so helping NGOs fighting gender-based violence update their listings with accurate descriptions of services offered, affected hours, hotlines, contact information, so you can be found in a digital world. We found these were some of the kind of asks we were getting to help with as we hit this crisis.
Lorraine, you can't be all things to everybody, but I'm just wondering, obviously there are going to be different levels of digitally access and devices and connectivity. So how do you work in an area that might not have high connectivity, or can you not? Is there only so much that you're able to do?
Most people have access in the world today, have access to even basic phones. Africa is a great example of that, where there's just an extraordinary prevalence of phones that have basic connectivity. We work really, really hard, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to build a website that's dedicated to COVID-19. You can build very light pages that are very easy access, very low in content that would eat up data, for example, and make pages super light, they load fast, and make it easy to print off and disseminate and share. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we know our platforms like YouTube, for example, is just countries like India, Africa, young people who can't read, for example, will watch videos. So you get through the literacy gap by having video content. And so that's an incredibly important part of the answer. And the third part, I would say, is extraordinary partnership. So we are never going to be the experts on these topics. What we can do is work with partners who are. The many NGOs we work with, led by, I would say, UN Women, Phumzile and her team, and they know how to get information out to people. So if we help curate a platform and use our platform and our voice to get out to people, they also know how to bring that into the local communities through partners and to make sure it reaches folks on the ground in a very grassroots way.
Edie, I am on the mailing list of UN Women, so I see the work that you do pretty much every day. Thank you for all of the emails that you send me. But from almost the very start of when COVID-19 became an issue, I was seeing connection with some of the work that you do about girls. You're saying, don't forget about girls, don't forget about education, don't forget about gender-based violence. All of the issues that you deal with, all of the challenges seem to be amplified by coronavirus. Were you surprised about that? We've never been in a situation in our recent memory we've had to deal with that on a global scale. How did you deal with that as an agency?
Yeah, Well, I have to say, I mean, I obviously wasn't pleased that we have a pandemic, but I also wasn't going to waste a good crisis. I was going to make sure that we amplify the message that we need to be sending out there, so that there's a connection between responding to COVID-19 and building up better already. Because these are long-term issues that we have to deal with. But on the immediate side, COVID highlighted to us the danger of fake news, because there has been just so much fake news. And with women's relative low literacy in most parts of the world, it's actually important that women who are able to connect get correct information, because they share it with their families. Fake health news are not without victims. We could actually precipitate a crisis by denying people reliable information. So that has been also one of our important things. But to the extent that the COVID-19 helped us to also talk to government about making the services that are needed by women who experience violence essential services. We are using that to address an issue that we've always wanted to address, but we didn't always get the attention that we needed. And we intend to keep this as an issue on the table beyond COVID. Digitalization also, which is something that also brings us close to Google, is an important missing link, which would leave many of the girls without the possibility to proceed with their education. If whatever happens to the pandemic, we will be relying more and more on online education. So we need to make sure that we push the access of online education and digitalization in as many countries as possible, because we fought so hard for girls' education. It probably was one of the things that we were seeing was and could go real well, and to lose it right now because of COVID-19, I think it's just too devastating. So we are trying to use technology, for instance, to see how we could close the gap so that we don't lose girls because of this pandemic, and we lose something that we've worked for the last 25 years.
Lorraine, I am wondering what you have learned, your takeaway, what might be useful from this collaboration with UN Women at this time during COVID-19 that you can take forward and apply it so that there's more development that can happen in the future.
I think we've learned a lot through this and through all of the many efforts we've all worked on together through COVID. Certainly, just as Fumzile just mentioned, education, I think, will continue to be a huge focus area for all of us. The role of digital tools and platforms, especially as 90% of the world's schools had to suddenly work from home and teach from home. So we launched a big program called Teach from Home with UNESCO across 100 countries to help teachers cope with that. To me, those are programs and skills we can keep beyond COVID. A lot of the things we've seen in education, digital learning tools, remote learning, I think we should try and do everything we can to have those continue beyond COVID, because they give everyone a chance, especially girls. Another thing we launched was Read Along with Google. It's an Android app that allows you to learn to read at home. A very simple way. We launched it in India before COVID, but then very quickly realized this was a fundamental tool to give to kids at home all over the world. So we accelerated the launch all over the world. And I think especially young girls at home who don't have the same access to education as boys, for example, will really benefit from tools like that, resources like that. So I think education is one big area, having worked together, that we can see post-COVID. There's a lot of learnings from this that will continue. The other area I want to mention is economic empowerment. You know, I'm very fortunate to be able to sit here with you today because my husband's taking care of my kids. You know, I'm very lucky to have that set up, you know. And most women may not have that. We all know women carry this extra burden, especially working women, working mothers. I see it at work every day with young women in my team having their kids on their laps while they're trying to work. And but on the other hand, many of us have shown that we can do our jobs from home. So this idea of flexi working, I hope we don't lose this. You know, the ability to work from home, maybe take that dream job you want and do it from home without having to move if you can't move. Having more flexible working hours. Like, I think we're all learning an awful lot about that through COVID that I hope stays with us beyond COVID. And another part of, to me, of economic empowerment is women businesses, women founders. And we created a fund, $125 million fund to support small businesses. And we picked the partners who have a track record of getting to women small businesses and minority-owned small businesses, because they're the most affected. And if we can help lift women-run businesses through COVID and post-COVID, that will really set them up for success post-COVID as well.
Edie, I have a question for you, and this comes from Shah Amin Zaman. Thank you so much for being in our conference chat right now, Shah Amin. Edie, she asked, for the shadow pandemic impact, what are your suggestions to tackle these situations through PPP and corporates like Google? So she's asking you to apply your experience and then maybe broaden it out a little bit.
Yeah. So we already are supporting women who are producing PPE, which means they are filling a gap in their own countries, supplying something that is much needed and not always easily available. But we obviously want them to think beyond just PPE, so that even beyond COVID, whatever they learn out of this experience, they can use it. So Google for us and any other technology platform is important for access to market. We would like to make sure that these women collaborate. So we have work happening in India, women producing PPE, in West Africa, and in Latin America. And as one organization, we want these women to collaborate so that they could use their collective market power to lower the expenses that they incur, their production expenses. But also, because so much is going to be virtual, we actually want to facilitate their training together. So Lorraine, I've got news for you. You are going to help us to have market access so that these can really take advantage of the reconfiguring markets in the world, which hopefully will allow new people to come in. Because if that does not happen, we are not building back better if we retain the status quo as was before COVID.
Agreed.
Executive Director, I think you've just shown how you lead from the front and take an opportunity. Thank you for that answer about PPE. I should have actually said the full phrase here for the acronym public-private partnerships as well. But I think between the idea of you talking to Google and utilizing that, I feel that you kind of embodied and showed it as an example what PPP can also do. I'm going to end this conversation, ladies, with Jeanette Siha. And Jeanette says, this is such a necessary conversation. Thank you, UN Women, for highlighting this important issue. So thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Executive Director of UN Women. We really appreciate you. Thank you for taking time to be part of the Leaders Summit and the SDG Power Hour. You certainly brought power to our hour. Thank you both.
Thanks,
Thank
Femi.
you so much. Thank you so much.
One more conversation to put in this hour. And we're going to be talking about sustainable energy for all. It is an initiative, a project that came out from the World Bank and the UN working together. I'm not going to be talking about it alone. I will be talking to Damalola. Damalola, hello. Please join me.
John Thwaites from Monash Sustainable Development Institute is starting it off.
Nice to see you. Damalola, so introduce yourself, and you have so many titles and you have so many fingers in so many pies. I want you to impress everybody and explain who you are and what you do.
And I'm also the UN Secretary General's. I'm the CEO for Sustainable Energy for All, and I'm also the UN Secretary General's Special Rep for Sustainable Energy for All. And our key focus as the organization is to achieve SDG 7, which is affordable, sustainable, and modern energy for everybody on the planet.
Where is the energy sector right now? We're in I don't even know if we're at the middle. Who knows where we are of COVID-19, our coronavirus crisis that is happening around the world. What's the energy sector doing? How is it faring?
Well, the energy sector, like all sectors, could do much better. But I think what is important is that once we had these discussions today, either women or education, digitalization, that energy is that golden thread that holds everything together. And without energy, it's very difficult to achieve any of the other SDGs by 2030. So in terms of the energy sector right now, it's not great. There's still 789 million people without access to electricity globally, and there's 2.8 billion people without access to clean cooking. As you may know, clean cooking causes a lot of different diseases, and the trajectory we're going now, we might find ourselves by 2030 with, a third of the population still not having access to clean cooking and not achieving SDG 7 about energy for all. So that's why it's just really important to have a particular focus on sustainable energy for all.
Damnalik, I mean, you just reeled off those statistics and they're very impressive, but I always feel that people connect with stories. For example, where will you take us to illustrate how serious it is not having that clean energy, not having energy?
I mean, I think it's important to note that energy is the difference between life and death. In my previous role, working in the Nigerian government, I mean, you could see firsthand things like infant mortality rates going down because you electrified that rural clinic. You could see firsthand, all the things we're talking about, gender-based violence, when you provide women with access to energy. Actually, providing women with access to energy can increase their deliverables or their income by about 59%. So it's really a critical part of, it's not a nice to have that I think some people take for granted. And we wouldn't even be talking now through this medium if we didn't have access to energy. So for millions or hundreds of millions of people, especially in Africa, it's not COVID has struck as a terrible time because you can't tell people who don't have access to electricity or clean cooking to just stay at home. It's not feasible.
You bring up a really important point, and that is COVID-19 on the push already to try and get more energy to people around the world. How has that stalled that? Because one of the things that we wanted to do today is just to remind people that, as the executive director of UN Women says, I don't want to waste a good crisis. Like, she's using this crisis for momentum. How do we do that in the energy sector?
I mean, it's almost obvious, really, because we've been able to see just how bad things are. If we had access to energy for all primary healthcare centers or education facilities, a lot of developing countries would not have been hit as hard as they have been. And this just shows, how fragile it is. I mean, what's the point of having a ventilator if there's no way to power it? So it is putting it critically on the front line. And especially back to what I'm saying, you really can't achieve any other SDG if you haven't achieved the one for sustainable energy first. And it's so critical to a post-COVID recovery. It's critical to what recover better looks like. I think this is like the executive director said, this is a good crisis because it allows us to reset. It allows us to think, what is recover better with sustainable energy for all? What could be in the recovery plans? What is the opportunity of having sustainable energy as a core part of basically how countries work that relate directly to more GDP, more jobs? So that's the way we've been looking at it, trying to, not preach about it, but show countries the fact that if you do go on a sustainable energy route, it is actually one of the quickest ways to increase your GDP and also provide a lot more jobs for your citizens, especially women.
What is recover better then? What does that mean?
Well, so for recover better as it relates to sustainable energy for all, it's I could break it up into three buckets. I think if you're talking to any countries, you have to talk about what opportunity it brings, what the benefits will be, and what are the enablers, which is what they have to do to make sure it happens. So we've seen, and these are facts, that you get more jobs from renewable energy than you do from fossil. You've seen that if you actually, apart from it being cleaner and climate friendly, it is actually the fastest way to actually recover, because for every dollar you spend on energy, you get back about 0.93 cents of additional GDP, which is very, very important in a time of COVID, in a time of recession. But it doesn't just, you can see that if you can't have a health sector without power. You can see that you can't have a sustainable education sector without power. So providing the right types of guidelines for governments to put in their stimulus packages that give them what they want to see, which is economic growth, is important, and showing that there's a way they can do it more sustainably if they focus on providing adequate and sustainable and modern energy. And I want to stress modern, because a solar lantern is not a modern energy source, right? Enough energy for women to be able to work, have a lot of productive uses, be able to dry their yam, do things like that, is very, very critical, and it is the heartbeat of a lot of developing countries.
Alan Tubakov is on our conference platform right now. He's one of the delegates. He's agreeing with you, Damilola. Good, effective energy supply is vital for sustainable development. How do you take where we are right now? We're 10 years away from 2030. Businesses were already behind in terms of being on track for the SDG. So this was the decade of action, and now we've had a global pandemic. How do we recover better, stronger, together, in a nutshell, from the energy perspective?
From the energy perspective, I think it ties into all different perspectives and all the people who've spoken today. I mean, the key part is that we need to act now, is that we can't slow down. So we were already behind and we're not on track, but we can become on track. And we need to focus on implementation on ground in countries, and we need to be able to support countries as well with either policies, energy efficient plans, integrated energy plans, just things that they need to actually catalyst around this. Another key part is financing. So a lot of countries want to do the right things, but how would they be funded? And this is where climate financing and all these other resource-based financing actually really comes in. And basically a mixture of all of that will bring us back on track, but a huge amount of investments needed. Something on the line of about 40 billion every single year is needed to get people to energy, universal energy access by 2030.
There's so much innovation going on right now. People are stuck at home, they're thinking, they're not commuting so much. What have you seen in your sector that made you go, wow, I would never have expected that to happen?
I mean, there is a lot of innovation, but I think I kind of agree with the lady from Google in terms of the fact that we could actually work from home. I spend kind of 3 weeks out of 4 on a plane. And the fact that we could actually sit down and work from home. But seriously, in terms of technology, there's a really exciting inverter battery technology, storage things coming up from young students. And I'm just really excited for the prototypes and the things they can bring together. The other part is back to digitalization, kind of using the data to be able to even identify where the people are that need the energy. And so there's a lot of really cool geospatial stuff that has happened. And it's really brought us closer, because, you have to sit down and listen and absorb everything that's going on around you.
Are you in a positive mood right now? Are you thinking, we're in a good place, we can do this, we're on track for 2030, we can get back on track for 2030?
Definitely. I mean, I'm always optimistic, unless I wouldn't have taken this role. It's so important. It's about people who are less fortunate, extremely vulnerable. And I think this is why we all do these jobs, to be able to really impact change and transform people's lives.
Damilola, thank you very much for spending time with us at the Leaders Summit in the SDG Power Hour. We really appreciate you. Take care.
Thank you very much, Femi. Bye-bye.
So, 10 hours ago, I sat down and I said, welcome everybody. And we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the UN Global Compact right here. And we are going to have a conference that will be from June 15th to June 16th. It is 26 hours long. I have been here for 10 hours of it. I'm going to log off, get myself a cup of tea, and then sit down and watch it like everybody else is. But before we do that, I am just wondering what 10 hours of highlights might look like. Let's take a look. Hi there, Dan.
Hi, Femi. Thank you so much.
Hi,
You've done such a wonderful job.
I was expecting the highlights tape, Dan. Are you going to do the highlights tape?
Yeah,
Are you going to reenact the last 10 hours?
I think you've done enough already. You've done 10 hours. You've really done a fantastic job. Your enthusiasm is so infectious. You've set just the right tone and the energy for this very grand occasion, our UN Global Compact 20th Anniversary Leaders Summit. And we are so grateful to you for the energy that you've brought to this occasion. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And it is sustainable energy, so it's right on track with the theme.
Well, I'm going to need it because it's going to be my job to keep those energy levels going for the next 16 hours as this summit chases the sun from a start here on the East Coast of the United States, around the world, until we finish the summit. We close the summit in the morning, the New York morning, on the 16th of June in 16 hours' time. So, Femi, you've done a fantastic job. We're extremely grateful. You're fantastic. Thanks so much for doing this
You're so welcome.
Extraordinary summit. Thank you.
Take care.
So, thank you, Femi. Take care. So next up, we're going to be traveling south of the equator across the Pacific Ocean to Australia, where our Global Compact Network convenes Australia's leading companies, civil society organisations and universities. And in a minute, we'll be handing over to my colleague, the Executive Director of the Global Compact Network Australia, Kylie Porter. And for the next 2 hours, Kylie and her colleagues will be convening discussions around climate change in times of crisis and the role of bribery prevention in building strong partnerships for the SDGs. But since it's Monday evening here at the UN in New York, and for you in Australia, you're just starting your day on Tuesday morning, and you've probably been asleep for some of the last 10 hours, I hope at least, I'd like to play you a short film to give you an idea of how this Leaders Summit began 10 hours ago.
Hello delegates, welcome to the UN Global Compact Leaders Summit 2020.
More than 20,000 business professionals and sustainability experts have joined the UN Global Compact Leaders Summit already. On this virtual platform, attendees have been visiting booths to learn more about how the UN is engaging companies, networking with each other, and hearing from an impressive lineup of speakers.
Now more than ever, as big decisions are made about our future, companies need to address environmental, social and governance risks holistically and move beyond business as usual.
We can build a better tomorrow where we leave no one behind.
And it really does put the onus on businesses and the financial sector to help the world recover better.
The first and highest priority is to protect your staff and stakeholders, including your service providers, clients, and the communities in which you operate.
Listening to the scientists is crucial to dealing with the climate crisis.
Clearly, we need a strong global initiative now.
Leading CEOs from around the world also urge their peers to step up their SDG ambition.
And I'm very confident that together we will find ways to strike that right balance to make progress faster.
And this special film highlighted the 20th anniversary of the initiative.
And we, the United Nations, initiate a global compact of shared values and principles which will give a human face to the global market.
The theme you will hear today over and over again is Recover Better. recover stronger, recover together.